Hello everybody, welcome back. In this session we will talk about attacks on basic and digest authentication, and we will have some practical examples. But first, let's see what's wrong with basic and digest authentication. The first and the most dangerous issue is the credentials. The credentials sent in plain text or basic encoding in basic auth and in weak hash which is MD5 in digest auth. The second issue is that the credentials sent to the server with each request. The browser caches the credentials for UX purpose, but in the backstage, the browser or the client keeps sending the credential to the server with each request. The third issue is that in most cases, developers don't add any protection layer with basic auth. There is no protection against brute force or rate limit or any other REST API protection. So let's start with the first attack, which is man-in-the-middle attack. I think you are already guessed the attack when you saw that it uses only base 64 encoding to send the data to the server. For those who are not familiar with man-in-the-middle attack, it basically has a hacker hijack the connection and put himself between you and the endpoint or website you are requesting, so he can listen to the traffic and modify it if he wants. So in this type of authentication, if it's used without SSL connection, you can perform man-in-the-middle attack against the victim and stole his credentials. Here is a screenshot from Wireshark. Wireshark is a network sniffing tool. As you can see, it easily catches the request with the full credentials. Okay, another example of attacks is wrong HTTP method. This is actually logic attack. This attack happens when the developer secures single or multiple HTTP methods with basic auth, and his actual code is accepting requests from other HTTP methods. To understand this attack, let's take an example. I have here a simple PHP server running. So let's request. Here is developer tell us that we can post this page. So let's try to post it. Here we use perp and let the set is on. Okay. So let's refresh the request again. Here, perp catches the request. So let's try to modify the request to post request, and let's forward it. Okay. Here we find the dialog of basic authentication. So we know that the developer is allowing GET request to this URL, but in post request he protected with basic auth. But luckily for us, this is an indicator that he are maybe not protecting other methods as well. So let's try to manipulate it. Cancel here, and let's try again. But this time, let's instead of post, let's make it boot. Boot request is behave like post request, so we can add body to the request, and let's forward it. Here, as I say, we bypass the basic authentication and we post it to this page, and here is our payload. This is because developer is already protecting his code against post requests and allowing other HTTP methods. So we used another HTTP method which is post request, and it's behave like post request and make our request. To understand it, let's look at developer code. Here we can find that he is check the server request method. If it posts, he shows us the dialog for basic authentication and halts the connection. But if it's not post request, he continue to make the logic of the application. So our request method wasn't post, it was put request, but in his code he are getting our payload or data from the post request we made it with put request. Okay, let's talk about another attack, which is brute force attack. As we said, basic OS don't provide any protection against brute force attack. It don't have any rate limit or spike policies, so it leaves it to the developer to implement his own protection. And in most cases, developers don't care and leave it open. Let's have some examples about how to perform a brute force attack against basic authentication endpoint using perp. Okay. First, let's see the endpoint that we want to exploit. Let's forward it. Here we say that basic authentication, but actually we don't know the credentials, so we need to brute force it. Okay, here is an HTTP history. Here is our request, and here is the authorization basic, and here is our wrong credentials. But we need to brute force it, so we will send it to the intruder here, and in position we need to define which parameter we want to brute force it. So in this case we want to brute force these credentials in authorization header, so we add this parameter, and when we say payload type, we choose custom iterator, and in position 1 here we add list for our list to brute force. This is the user position for user. We are using perp free version, so we can't add lists outside lists. But if you have the professional version of perp, you can add a list to brute force. But for proof of concept, let's add some users. Let's add user 0, user 1, user 2. This is just a list to perp use to try to brute force the basic authentication. And here is a separator for the position. And let's choose position 2. This is for password. User and you pass user 1 pass, user 2 pass, user 3 pass, user 4 pass. Okay, this no. So position 1 includes some potentials and separator with colon, and position 2 is passwords. But this need to be encoded in base 64, so we need to add encoding. We in payload processing we click add, and we choose encode and base 64 encode and hit OK. But we here in payload encoding we don't need to perp to encode the column in the position 1, so we that will lead to duplicate encoding, so we'll not use this URL encode. Now we are set, we can start the attack. Here is a notice from perp that we are using free version. It has some limitation, so we hit OK. And here we see that he launched the attack. This is the payload and the status. Here 401 status that unauthorized, but here we can find 200. Okay, that means that the request is going through. So this is the request that broke the basic authentication. This is the credential we want, so we highlight it and let's convert it to normal text from base 64. And here we see that the username is user1 and the password is user1 pass. Okay. Let's now talk about what if the basic authentication was implemented in server configurations. Let me introduce you to two important files, htpasswd and htdaiGest. This file contains credentials for the basic authentication, so web server can use it to check the login. It can be in any location at the server, but in most cases it's in the same folder as the ht access. So first, let us see what is the structure for these two files. For htpasswd, every line represents a user, and the line consists of the user and colon and the password hashed in MD5 and iterated using Apache APR algorithm, which will repeat the MD5 around 1000 times. Regarding the htdaiGest, it's the same like htpasswd. Every line represents a user, but the line consists of a user and the colon and the realm and colon and the password hashed in MD5. Okay, let's have some examples to see how it works. We can use Apache tools to generate htpasswd and htdaiGest. So let's make a folder to test. Okay. We hit htpasswd -c for create file and then file name htpasswd and following with username. He will ask us for the password, so we will enter the password and we will enter again. Okay, now he created a new file htpasswd, so let's view the content of the file. Here we will find the username followed by the password in MD5 with APR algorithm. Now let's generate another file for htdaiGest. Taxi for create, and his file name followed by the realm actually and the username. Okay. Now he asked for the password, so we add the password and just again. Let's view the contents. Here we find the username and the realm and the passwords in MD5. Okay. Now let's see how to attack this type of credentials. Actually, there is a lot of workarounds to grab these credentials, but the most obvious one, if the server is vulnerable for local file inclusion. So we used this vulnerability to access the sensitive data in credentials files. So let's see some examples. Okay, let's for now. Here some websites, and here we find that this website is vulnerable to local file inclusion attack, and the site is holding a protected area with basic authentication. Okay, so we know that this URL is vulnerable to local file inclusion, so we try to grab the credentials for the basic auth. We guess that it's in the same file, so we try. Here we are, we found it, and here is the content of the file. To decrypt this content of the file, you can use any tool, but my favorite tool is Jones Ripper. So if we create a new file and add the content of the hash here, and let's run Jones on the file. Okay, here we are. John decrypted the file, the hash file, and here is the username and the password is KOKO123. Okay. Now let's have a talk about how to mitigate this type of attacks and how to use basic OS more secure and not be exposed to this type of attacks. First of all, and the most important, is use SSL. You can't make it through without using SSL. You are exposed. There is no strong hash used in basic authentication or digest authentication, so you must use SSL if you will use basic authentication. You must limit retries per username to avoid brute forcing attacks. You must force hard password rules to make it hard for decryption tools if the passwords or the credentials leaked in any mean. And lastly, don't protect single methods for the URL. Protect all methods. If you will protect a URL using basic auth, protect all methods for this URL. Don't protect methods and make another method open. This will lead to an attack. Okay, that's all for now. So thank you.